Hello and welcome to the Vine Life Podcast. I'm Tony Clark, your host, and today I've got a special guest on the program. And the introduction that I'm going to give will not do this gentleman justice, so just be prepared here and keep that in mind. But I'm going to interview Gordon Kennedy. And Gordon is a songwriter, musician, and also a record producer. His most successful composition to date is the international hit song Change the World, recorded by Eric Clapton, for which he and his co-writers received a Grammy Award for Song of the Year in 1996. Gordon also received a Grammy for Best Pop Instrumental Album in 2007, co-producing, composing, and performing on Peter Frampton's Fingerprints album. He was a member of the Christian rock band Whiteheart for a number of years. Gordon has written many songs recorded by Garth Brooks and has done projects with Peter Frampton and also Ricky Skaggs. His songs have been recorded by artists including Bonnie Raitt, and we'll talk about her in just a moment, Alison Krauss, Stevie Nicks, Faith Hill, and also Carrie Underwood, and many others. His compositions have been heard on film soundtracks as well. So, Gordon, thank you so much for agreeing to do this today.
Tony, thank you, Tony. I appreciate your having me on.
Well, it's my pleasure, certainly. And, Gordon, I've listened to some of your interviews and read some of your interviews as well. And if you don't mind, a major influence in your life is your dad.
Of course.
And I know that you've honored your dad in the interviews and you think a lot about your dad. So let's start with your dad, if you don't mind. This interview is about you, but what has shaped you as a human being and as a musician? Who is your dad?
Well, my father's name is Jerry Kennedy. The house I grew up in certainly had a lot to do with me choosing to do music. And in fact, I've never done anything other than music my entire life. My dad, and if I can go back to where it all started for him, he was 9 years old, oldest of three kids. His father, who I'm named after, was a deputy sheriff in Shreveport, Caddo Parish, Louisiana. He took my father as a 9-year-old kid. It takes my father to get a guitar lesson from a guy named Tillman Franks. And you can look up Tillman Franks and see that he was a fixture on the Hayride in Louisiana for a number of years. He was the upright bass player for Johnny Horton. He was a co-writer on "I'm a Honky Tonk Man," that song. But he's the guy that my grandfather took my dad to see on a Friday afternoon to take that first guitar lesson. Following Monday, my grandfather died.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, he placed my dad on the path he'd be on the rest of his life. And, of course, that's influenced where I wound up as well, just 3 days before my grandfather left this world. So Dad stays with Tillman, learning. Tillman becomes a mentor, guitar instructor, helps him get going in music at the point where my dad is actually signing a record deal with RCA Victor. And I think my dad was maybe 11 or 12 when he got a record deal. So, yeah. So he keeps learning with Tillman, and as a teen, he's becomes an artist, is playing on the Hayride himself. They say at some point, you need to do a duet with this other artist on Ram Records out of Shreveport, a girl named Linda Brannon. They get together and play on the Hayride the song. They do a cover of "Who Wears Shorts," and they go and do that. Goes over big. Somebody says, "You guys got to do that again." They do. And at some point, they start dating. And at 17, they got married, and they had me at 19. Moved to Nashville when I was about a year and 3 months old, because my dad's wanting to, at this point, just put his toe in the water here in Nashville to see if he can, make it a career out of it in Nashville as a session player, which he ends up doing. He's played on records that a lot of people you would know just the titles of, because they're so iconic. He's electric guitar on songs like Pretty Woman, Oh Pretty Woman by Roy Orbison,
Wow.
Good Luck Charm, Elvis Presley, Stand By Your Man, Tammy Wynette, a lot of George and Tammy records, duets. Just Walk On By, Leroy Van Dyke. He's the dobro player, all that lead stuff on the fretted dobro or round neck dobro, they call it, on Harper Valley PTA. And
Wow.
and just on and on and on and on and on. I'm still finding out things even in recent years that he played on, because you have to like draw this information out of my dad, or it has to come up in a conversation where somebody else is talking to him about something. And then as a producer, when he became head of Mercury Records in Nashville, he signed like Roger Miller, his first record deal, and produced all of those Roger Miller hits that we know, King of the Road, Chug-a-Lug, Dang Me, England Swings, on and on and on with Roger. Signed the Statler Brothers. He produced them for, I think, 31 years. Tom T. Hall, Johnny Rodriguez signed Reba McEntire, her first record deal. So there's this huge career path that my dad was on from that first guitar lesson as a 9-year-old kid that is hard to wrap your head around it when you think about it. And he's a member of the Musicians Hall of Fame, along with 6 other gentlemen that are called the Nashville A-Team Players. They were inducted into that Musicians Hall of Fame in 2007. And when Brenda Lee inducted them, she commented that these 7 gentlemen collectively account for over 130,000 recording sessions.
Oh my gosh.
So that's what I mean when I say, it's hard to imagine, but when I'm a kid growing up and the family's in the car on vacation, whether it was 3 hours to Gatlinburg or 9.5 hours to Shreveport, the entire trip, my dad is reaching for the volume knob on the radio, turning it up, saying, I think I played on this. I think I played on this. And this would go on over and over and over. And now if you were like on satellite radio, listening to the classic country station, 60s and 70s, that era of music, he's probably either produced or played on maybe 1 out of every 3 songs that they would play on channels like that. So pretty extensive. That's the house I grew up in.
Wow. So with your dad having that huge, I mean, he's basically extremely well known in the music industry when you were a kid. Did you have any other choice except to be a musician?
No, I mean, I think he would have loved for me. He didn't do anything to persuade me or encourage me other than come home with reel-to-reel tapes every other day of something he had produced or played on in the studio or both. So, while most families probably would think about their favorite family gathering around the TV to see their favorite shows together or something, our family was sitting in front of a reel-to-reel tape machine spinning, and it was whatever he had done in the studio that day with Jerry Lee Lewis or the Statler Brothers or Roger Miller and artists he was working with. And so if you couple that, what he was bringing home with the fact that my first record player arguably was a Seaberg 100 jukebox player that my dad had in the basement of our home. And he'd show me how to play the records, turn the thing on and punch a letter and a number and call up these 45s. And so I would sit in front of that jukebox for hours. A lot of the records that he was producing, but also he would throw in there records that he just loved. Buster Brown's Fannie Mae. So there's that R&B thing. And my mom, that was really her favorite music. So I was getting exposed to that kind of music. And a lot of what Dad played on wasn't just country music. It was, even Roger's stuff was kind of pop and it would cross over, but Pretty Woman certainly was a crossover sensation. And, that's a rock iconic song, rock and roll. So I was getting exposed to all the stuff he was involved with as a player producer, but then he would be bringing home records that he loved. Like he brought me the first Beatles record that was released in the States. And,
oh gosh,
I'm a little bitty kid, now my mind is, blowing up. And I always say as a songwriter, we can get into this later, but I always figure my 2 biggest influences as a songwriter would have to be Roger Miller sitting on this shoulder and the Beatles over here on this shoulder because of what my dad was bringing home. And I was listening to a steady diet of that kind of music. And then again, because he ran Mercury Records for 21 years, they would send these huge boxes of vinyl records to the house twice a year or 4 times a year. I can't remember, but all the new product that would come out on Mercury Records. So I was being inundated with, the newest stuff by, Bachman Turner Overdrive, Rod Stewart's Every Picture Tells a Story was a staple record for me growing up. I think I was in the 5th grade or something when that came out. And even Rush, those albums were on Mercury. So we'd get all that stuff, but then we'd get, Mo Bandy and all these country artists, and then a lot of Confunction and different, records in that genre of music. So it would be just this plethora of styles of music that would just arrive at our house. And me and my 2 brothers, Brian and Shelby, would dive into that box of records like soldiers getting letters from home. I always thought of it being that way, and everybody would tear into those things and then off to our separate record players. And so my early childhood memories are reel-to-reel tapes spinning and vinyl records spinning and all of that going into the filing cabinet up here.
Wow, that's amazing. Gordon, can you think back to when your dad was producing some of the famous songs? Can you think back to hearing them before they were on the radio? Can you think back to those?
Well, yeah. I mean, like I said, we would hear the Roger Miller stuff. In fact, I'll give you a key story, and I kind of laugh and tell people these days when I'm speaking to a group of people or something. I'll say, I've been in the music business since I was 4 years old. And the story that backs this up is my dad signs Roger Miller, 1964, and they produced this first album on Roger, and he chooses a song called Got To Again. It's going to be the first single. And he brings this thing called a test pressing, which is this thick lacquer vinyl, test pressing record home just to put on the turntable and listen to make sure that levels of songs are okay, that the distance between the songs are okay. This isn't too big a gap or too short a gap between this song and that song. All this stuff, he's got to do it before they approve this going to press. And he's playing that test pressing in the basement of our home in Goodlettsville, Tennessee. And there's Got To Again, which is the song he had chosen for the first single. And it gets to the song Dang Me. And me and my brother Brian, I'm 4, he's 2. We come tearing down the stairs into this little room where my dad's listening to this stuff and just start dancing our little fannies off. And I heard my dad telling on a documentary about looking at the 2 kids dancing. I think he said we were just in our underwear, no shirts, and just started boogieing to the Dang Me. And he thought to himself, maybe I've chosen the wrong song as the first single, and called the president of Mercury Records in Chicago and said, how hard would it be to change the first single?
Oh, wow.
Rod, how the A-side, Roger's first A-side, to a different song. And Mr. Green said, how sure are you about this? Because we've pressed 5,000 discs already. And my dad said, I'm sure. And they ground up those first 5,000 discs they pressed of Got To Again, and changed the first single to Dang Me. So wow. Yeah, we heard that before you heard that. But there would be many instances of that growing up, like Jerry Lee Lewis, Chantilly Lace. They did the cover of that Big Bopper song. And that was a #1 song for Jerry Lee Lewis. And we heard the reel-to-reel tape of that, the day it happened. And it also happened to be that was the first take in the studio. So we would be privy to stories like that, all growing up, during the years we were growing up, and the stuff he was bringing home.
Well, that's amazing. And that one story, it sounds like you were a music producer at 4 years old, right? That's crazy.
I would call me and my brother Brian the underwear A&R team because we were helping choose the material. Oh, and there was also I'll just give you one more quick one. When the Rod Stewart Every Picture Tells a Story album came to the house, I chose that and took that to my room and was listening to that record for days and days and days and days. And my dad told me years later, when I had grown up a bit, that he had subsequently gone to a meeting in Chicago with Mercury where they would sit around and sort of discuss, here are the records that we've just released. We're getting ready to release these. And this is how that record's doing on the charts, reach this, falling from there, all these different, the current state of Mercury Records in the music business. And they brought up the fact that Rod Stewart had released the title cut from that album, Every Picture Tells a Story, as the first single. And it was doing this on the charts. They were, discussing that. And my dad casually mentioned, he said, well, my son Gordon likes this other song on that record a lot called Maggie May.
You're serious? Wow.
Yeah. So he just mentions this at the meeting. Well, they do end up putting that song out as the next single, and that blows up for Rod Stewart. So my dad says the next meeting he goes to, they're sitting around talking about this artist, this artist, this artist. And at some point, the president of Mercury, he leans in and my dad says, what does your boy like on this album? So I was sort of the beta test kid without knowing it. And I actually have one of those test pressing albums of the follow-up album they put out on Rod Stewart that had, I think it had cover of Twisting the Night Away and Angel. There's a cover of the Hendrix song. And anyway, it's just this plain white label with typed. Now, somebody had done it with a typewriter, the label. But I noticed years later that down in the edge of that round label, they typed my name. So this test pressing went to our house to be given to me so that my dad could at some point go, what do you like on that record? So that was my, again, the little guinea pig running around the house.
Wow. These are incredible stories. And Gordon, you're such a unique, not only producer and singer songwriter, but also a guitar player as well. When did you start playing the guitar? I
probably, I could send you a picture of me holding one when I, was 4 years old or something. I've got a picture of me with a ukulele when I was probably not even 2. And I sent you the picture of me with the badminton. And I think I thought I was left-handed when I was a kid because I've been playing at it that way until I seriously started trying to learn, I think when I was 9.
Oh, gosh.
So I was learning, some chords and then I got I would pick those things up and make a run at it for a little while and then go back to playing football or kill the man with it outside. And then at 11 years old, I remember getting a little more serious. I'd gone to visit a cousin, Randy Arthur, down in Shreveport. And by this time he was playing an electric guitar and he was listening to Jimi Hendrix records and Steppenwolf and all these things where the guitars were like daring you not to listen to the electric guitar. Right. So he lights a fire under me a little more and sends me home with a Fun with the Guitar book by Mel Bay, which is learning chords. So that's my first time to crack open a book and look at those dots, those fingers go here and there when I was 11. So, and again, it would be just kind of like messing with it from time to time, maybe learning, now that I know these 3 chords, I can play these 20 songs or whatever for a little while. But when my dad gave me an electric guitar, a Fender Telecaster for Christmas when I was 15 years old, that was it for me. There was no looking back. That just changed. And it didn't have to change it much, but I mean, that galvanized, I would describe it that way. What I wanted to do, what my passion was for the rest of my life. So that's when I got serious about it. And then within a couple of years, I would have a high school buddy who joined me at high school my junior year. He was a sophomore, and this was a guy named Dan Huff. So I'm going to high school with Dan Huff. And
Yeah.
any thoughts about, I mean, I love sports. I was way into sports, and I was a 3-sport athlete for 6 years at that school, Brentwood Academy. And so, but any thoughts I had about, being a little more serious about sports over music, there was Dan that would, oh no, if I'm going to keep up with this guy, I got to stay focused. Right. And then of course he would be the guy that would ask me, a handful of years later, if I would substitute for him for 3 shows with this group called Whiteheart that he was in, and they had done a couple albums at that point. Would I do 3 shows for him? And anyway, I said, yeah. And then I quit that band 6 years later because he never came back. But I mean, I've gone past the point of where I got started with the guitar, but I couldn't help it though. My dad's guitars would be strewn all over the basement when we would come home from school. We'd have to walk past guitars and amplifiers to go to the basement and up the stairs to the house. So they were just always there. And at some point he let me play them.
Amazing. And I'm curious, with your dad's being such a great professional musician himself, he didn't give you lessons, or did he give you lessons, or did you ask for them from him?
No, he didn't. Other than, again, providing the access to the instruments at some point, and then that steady diet of music. And I would add to what he was bringing home that he was working on. He would bring home records that he loved, the Beatles. I remember him bringing home Nashville Cats by Love and Spoonful just because he loved that song. Plus, John Sebastian was writing about the Nashville session players with the lyrics of that song. So I think it was a nod to these guys in Nashville that were doing sessions. So he loved that song. And Winchester Cathedral, he brought that record home. He brought home Hey Jude, and these are singles that he would bring home. So I knew that, there were just records outside of what he was working on. He would bring those home if he loved the records. And so they were always those things that we had access to, but I don't know if it was me just too scared to ask him, can you show me this? I remember asking him a question one time about the Lyndon Ronstadt track, When Will I Be Loved, the guitar solo. I said, how is that guy doing that? Because I was too young to figure out that it was 2 different tracks and a guy playing something and then using another track to harmonize on the top of it. I was asking him, how did he do that? And then when he said, oh, that's an overdub with a different track. And I kind of probably, shrinked away and went, like Chris Farley, stupid, So I think but I never asked him. When I'm 9 years old, we moved away from Goodlettsville, but the summer after we changed schools mid that year. And I went back to see my friends that lived on the dead end street in Goodlettsville. And the kid across the street from me, a guy named Scott Culberson, his dad was an Eastern Airlines pilot. And when we went back to visit, in a matter of just the handful of months since I had last seen them, he was getting guitar lessons. And I remember just being struck by that. Wait a minute, my dad's a guitar player. I should be learning the guitar, So it just got all over me. And I remember going back home a little bit, head hanging, and my grandmother was at the house with my mom in the kitchen there. And what's wrong? And I said, well, Scott's daddy's getting him guitar lessons, kind of fussing about it a little bit. Well, why don't you get your dad to teach you? He's a guitar picker. And they tell me, I said, he won't teach me. And they said, why not? My grandmother said, why not? I said, because he wants to be the best dang guitar picker in the world. That was my reasoning for why I thought my dad wouldn't teach me. Now, crazy that sounds. I laughed my head off when I heard that years later. But so anyway, but no, he never taught me anything other than by example, and which was what a lesson that's been. I mean, it's one thing I can think about sitting in front of somebody saying, put your fingers here and do this and do this. the other way, I think, works better for me. The way, just by having that, and some people would say living in the shadow of somebody, or I would say, at some point trying to try on my dad's shoes, but it was that person in front of me setting this pace and the tone of it all for me to follow that I think made way bigger difference in my life than if I had just gone down to Guitar Center for lessons.
Amazing. And I watched 2 interviews with your dad, and 2 words popped out to me: humility and grace. I just wanted to give you that from his responses and his being interviewed and his persona is just humility and grace. And you can see it in your dad. So,
my grandmother said that even when he was a little kid and he would do a show, or when he was a teenager, he would do a show, he would always leave by the back door and go down the alley to keep from having to talk to people and do the schmooze thing, and she said he always stood in the back. So that's how she described it. So, and then I realized that it can also be frustrating these days because there are some people out there that have sort of kind of rewritten some of the history of the way things actually happened in this town on big records and big artists and things like that. And he knows better. He knows the truth, but he won't speak up because he doesn't want to hurt somebody else's feelings and those kinds of things. I'll say, you got to tell the truth. It's, you just have to do that. But yeah, he's so cautious about, but I'm determined to write his book at some point. And then it dawned on me, it's in thinking about that recently, that my gosh, I keep finding out things I didn't know. And I said to myself, I want to write his book so I can read it. And I'm going to do that. I'm actually in the process of interviewing him and recording him right now with audio, telling stories.
Well, I can't wait to read that. That's certainly for sure. Amazing insight about your dad, Gordon. Let's fast forward a little bit in your life, and let's talk about Whiteheart. And in your past interviews, you've talked about how dominoes fall and how there's a sovereign hand, in essence, as a mosaic in your life, orchestrating things in your life. And when you try to orchestrate them in your life, the bullseye isn't always on the place that you wanted it to be. So, and you mentioned Dan Huff there and the Whiteheart gig, I guess. Talk about Whiteheart a little bit. What are some of your memories in the band, and what stands out to you in your 6 years with Whiteheart?
Well, again, I got into it, wasn't looking to be in the band, and in fact, I didn't really audition for it. It was Dan Huff coming to me and saying that he was going to go to LA and do some session work. Summer of '84, would I substitute 3 shows for him? And I said, okay. And then I went and did those 3 shows. He never came back to the group. He stayed out in LA for 5 years. I think that was the beginning of his staying out there doing session work for that long. But I mean, there are things in my life, when you mentioned the word dominoes, I at some point got to the place where I saw my life as dominoes. Like if there was a guy who used to come on the Tonight Show, and I saw it happen twice I remember them saying it took him about 12 hours to set up these dominoes, standing them up, and these intricate patterns and clovers and going up this, ramp and down and triggering this to toggle that, to drop that, to keep it going. And it would take about 2 minutes for this whole thing to fall. And it was wild looking. But I remember, some recent years thinking about, if our life is a series of those dominoes that are all standing up behind us, that if you reach back there and grab one and look at it and read it, there's somebody's name, or there's a date or an event, something, and you look at that and you can decide, or you can realize within a minute that, what, if this hadn't happened, or if this person hadn't happened, then I can think of all the things in my life that would have changed. So And I give the example of reaching back, pulling out, there's the name Carter Brown. That's my 5th and 6th grade football coach. And I played basketball for him my 6th grade year. If it weren't for Carter Brown, I would not be married to the person I'm married now. And I could draw just a quick, it's like playing that Kevin Bacon game, I guess.
6 degrees or something like that.
Yeah. Carter is the one that goes to the football coach at Brentwood Academy and says, hey, there are 3 boys in the Kennedy family that play football. So they brought, and we were sent the information and made aware of this private school in Brentwood that was just starting. So I went there. Well, that's where I met Dan Huff, who asked me to be in Whiteheart at some point, who I meet because I was doing a show in South Bend, Indiana on Halloween in 1986. I meet my future wife there. So, my wife, that goes back to 5th and 6th grade football coach. And you think, well, would that have happened some other way? I don't know. It's possible, but I'm just saying, it's clear that some of those things back there, I mean, that's why I met Tommy Sims. So the song Change the World would not have happened like it did had we not been in Whiteheart together. And it goes on and on and on. How those things back there matter. And I also learned at some point that some of those things you might reach back and find, and there's blank, or there is something that you wanted to happen that didn't. It might be that thing that you prayed about and thought was so sure going to happen. And then it's got that circle with the slash through it. And then you look at it now and you realize, oh my gosh, if that had happened, then these other things wouldn't have. So, I mean, you can look at life that way. It's pretty easy to sort of do a timeline. And I think you would see that very clearly for yourself if you did that.
Yeah, that's an amazing illustration. It's so true. So you go from Whiteheart, you decide to leave Whiteheart at some point, and there, between the Whiteheart and the Change the World, becoming famous, that song with Eric Clapton, what are those years between? What do they look like?
So, yeah, I got out of Whiteheart in 1990, and I started doing session work because a guy named Brown Bannister produced the last Whiteheart album. Freedom was the name of the album. And Tommy Sims, Chris McHugh, and myself being the rhythm section of Whiteheart at that time. After that record was over, we all sort of peeled off and started wanting to stay home and do session work more. So the guy that had produced the Freedom album was the first one standing there opening the door into the studio work in Nashville for, a lot of artists. I think I mentioned maybe David Meese, Twyla Paris, Amy Grant, and people that Brown was working with. So session work, Stephen Curtis Chapman. I did his, is it called Songs in the Key of, no, what is it? It's I forget the name of the album now. Can't believe it, but I got to play on that record for Stephen. And so we were happy to be home. And that's how at those years were when I was starting a family with Tracy, and we had our 2 youngins, Caitlin and Dylan, in that window of time. I'm calling it a window of time of about 6 years, because after the first year that I left Whiteheart, I started working also for a producer and songwriter named Wayne Kirkpatrick. And so I would go, and the first thing I did for him in the studio was something he and Brown co-produced together, and it was Kim Hill. I wrote a song with Tommy for the record, played on some things on the record, and then Wayne would call me when he was going to produce the first album on this new artist by the name of Susan Ashton. And I was supposed to bring a dobro and a gut string to do just 2 things. And then it wound up being Bring Your Electrics. And we did 2 weeks of me and him just by ourselves in the studio doing all the electric guitars on that first album. Oh, wow. So we became fast friends. Hey, you want to write together at some point? So we channeled our energies into hey, let's write some songs and see if we should do some recording or be a group ourselves, you know. Well, on those sessions, spring of 91, we're in the studio working on some stuff for this group that we're going to try to do. And we had Wayne and Tommy and myself sitting in a booth recording some things when Tommy says, "Say, fellas, is this something that would work for this group?" And he plays, and you know, within a couple of minutes, we were like, I'm thinking in my head, yeah, yeah, that's something that we could do. And I guess probably looking back on that, I probably was thinking, yeah, it sounds enough like McCartney that I love it. And Wayne was probably, you know, in his head going, that sounds enough like Fogelberg and James Taylor. And and then Tommy was probably thinking in his head, you know, I hope this doesn't sound too much like Stevie Wonder for these guys. Whatever. There were so many influences that came together in that. So tuck that away over here for a little bit. We end up getting like this developmental deal with the RCA Records New York. And the head of that label has us working for a year that goes into the spring of 92 without signing us, just kept saying to us, hey, I can get you an alternative hit out of this first 4 songs that you just did. But give me a pop hit, something he said, put another 0 behind those numbers. That's how he spoke to us. And so, you know, we would go back and try this. And in the spring of 92, now it's a year later, I go up to Columbus, Ohio, and Tommy and I demo Change the World. So we send that to the guy with RCA New York, thinking we finally have answered the bell for what he was looking for from us. And in the spring of 92, he hears it. Sorry, it wasn't the spring of 92. It was December that we sent that to him. No. I go back. December of, I'm losing. Let me see if it was I remember it being December because I had sent the song to the guy and my deal with MCA Music Publishing Company was all up at the same time. And we were finally given an answer by the label in New York. And it was, we don't hear the hit. And at least they finally gave us an answer. They said, we're going to pass. So we knew we were free to go and play this stuff for other people for the first time. Anyway, if you take that and just put it over to the side for a second, in, I think around late 94 at this time, early 95, Sparrow Records, who had, you know, been the label that I was, when I was with Whiteheart doing the Freedom album, that album was on Sparrow. They had a group called PFR that Jimmy Lee Sloas was producing, and I was participating when they would let me. I love these guys. I love them still.
Me too.
Wrote some songs, went and played and sang some parts, you know, and they bowed out. They decided to throw in the towel for some reason that at that time. And so Peter York at Sparrow asked Jimmy Lee, hey, find another group to, you know, do a record on. And then it was, hey, why don't you and Gordon find a group to do a record on? And then, hey, why don't you and Gordon do a record? You guys don't have to tour. And so that's how Dogs of Peace came about. And we did this first album called Speak, which came out in 96 maybe. And at the same time, back to the Change the World story, in 92, we got a Winona Judd to place the Change the World song on hold here in Nashville. Now, I had turned that song into my publisher, Doug Howard, who signed me in February of 92. I think it was. Sorry, 93. February of 93. Can you get this song to Clapton? And he said, well, we'll see what we can do. Well, he had just done Tears in Heaven, so I thought maybe he'd like this acoustic thing, you know.
Yeah.
was the first song I turned in to Doug on my new deal with him at Polygram Music. So we get the song Place on Hold with Winona instead, Tony Brown producing, and we were told it's going to be a single. But then a lot of things start happening in her personal life. She has a baby and different things, and that record doesn't come out for like 2.5 or 3 years.
Wow.
And then in that window of time, we had been told things like it's going to be a single. And then at one point, it was going to be a duet with Paul McCartney. All these things, we're getting all this stuff happening. So, but we're standing around tapping our foot, looking at our watches for 2.5 or 3 years. When they finally put her record out, it's around the same time that the Dogs of Peace album is being done. And we watched them put out 1, then 2, then 3 singles for Winona's album, and none of them were our song. We kept going, what's going on? And I finally run into her producer, Tony Brown, who says, I don't know what to tell you, but her label's saying they're not going to release this song. And he said, I think they're crazy, but they're saying that the radio will never play this song. So they never put that song out for her. Over here, now I'm doing this Speak album for Sparrow, and I had been having this conversation with God above, saying, at the time we were being asked to do this record, Jimmy Lee and I'd been out of Whiteheart for 5 years, and I'm thinking and praying, you want me to do this music again? You want me to share this message again? You want me to have that platform again? Okay, I'll do it. And it wasn't just hey, we're doing a favor for Sparrow Records because there's a void now, PFR left. It became something I got passionate about, poured my heart and soul into it. And when the record came out, now this is the same time we're seeing that Winona's not going to single our song. The Dogs of Peace thing comes out, and CCM magazine reviews it saying, sounds too much like the Beatles, too much like Pink Floyd and the Eagles, James Gang. And then they even
that's a bad thing.
Yeah, but they even pointed out that the title or the song called Dogs of Peace, that sounds like it could have been on a Whiteheart album. And I'm like, hello? I was in Whiteheart. So anyway, I figured we were sort of politely being shown the door by the industry.
Oh, wow.
And I now went to having this conversation where I was like, hey, I thought you wanted me to do this again, and what's going on? Well, summer of 96, I'm in the studio with Tommy when he looks at me it was on a Nicole Smith record. I remember he just casually mentions that we're getting another cut on Change the World. I said, really, who? And he said, Eric Clapton. And I know I stared at him for about 2 minutes.
Wow.
I said, what? And he said, yeah, tell me it's happening. It's going to be in a movie. And he mentioned John Travolta, which it wasn't. I mean, he mentioned Tom Hanks, but it ended up being John Travolta. But within a couple of weeks, we had a tape of the Clapton track. And so, are you kidding me? I'm sitting in the car by myself listening to it for the first time, and it ends after the first playthrough. Oh, no, when it started, I remember thinking to myself, oh, man, they slowed it down. And then I listened to the whole thing. When it ended, I'm sitting in the car by myself, and I just burst out laughing.
Really?
I'm laughing. I'm just laughing. I can't believe this. This voice that I've been listening to for decades has done our song. And I play it again a few more times. About the fourth time I'm playing it through, I'm saying to myself, oh my gosh, these guys have recorded a brilliant record here. And so that November, it gets nominated for Grammys, one for Best Pop Male Vocal Performance, which he won. Record of the Year, which is one of the big four, which he and Babyface, they won. And we got Song of the Year, Tommy, Wayne, and myself. And it was number one on the charts for like 13 straight weeks. It stayed in the top 20 AC Billboard charts for a record 81 consecutive weeks. But remember, the radio's never going to play that song. And remember, hey, I thought you wanted me to have this platform again. Well, that came about at Grammys because when we won, we walked up on the stage and I had Zip prepared to say, we thought there's no way three guys from Nashville are going to win Song of the Year, because in the 38 prior years, it had come from Nashville once.
Oh, goodness.
And Nashville's like, songwriting hotbed, capital of the world, whatever. And so we just, none of us thought, but we were there with our wives and we were enjoying being at the Grammys. And then we won. So we walk up to the stage, and Wayne, who can be kind of shy, kind of sticks his elbow in my ribs and goes, "Are you going to talk?" We're at Madison Square Garden, and so I walk up first. That was his way of saying, "You go first." And I walked up to the mic, and the first thing out of my mouth was, I said, "First of all, my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, He is strong, weak in no way." And then I made my thank yous. Yeah. And then I had, Wayne and Tommy made their thank yous, and we went to a party, met Clapton at one of the after parties, which we're told is unheard of because he doesn't go to parties. Anyway, I get back to the hotel, way late in the evening, trying to go to sleep. People have been calling from home here in Nashville, and everybody was saying the same thing. That thing you said, nobody says that. People thank God, but nobody says that. Nobody says that. And this went on for a while. By the time I was trying to lay down and finally about to doze off, go to sleep, I woke straight back up, and I said, "Oh, you did want me to have that platform again."
Oh, goodness.
And but it didn't look like I thought it would look. He let me say, because if it had been what I was shooting for, I'd get on the gospel bus and ride around, and how many years would I have to have ridden, touring and doing whatever to get to say what I said in 5 seconds to 1.5 billion people around the world. So it didn't look like what I was shooting for. That's what you were saying about, having that turn out differently or shooting for that target and that bullseye, which somebody else said it better than me. They said, and I'm paraphrasing here, but, we tend to paint the bullseye and we're so sure that we're going to hit that. And the arrow, that's your skill set and your abilities, and you prayed about it. And I know I'm going to hit that. And then it goes over and lands somewhere else. Somebody else said, wherever it lands, you take your best shot, but wherever that thing lands, you go over there and let God paint the bullseye around where you're landed. So that's what happened in this case. And ask me which I prefer at the end of the day, between the two scenarios of what I thought was going to happen and what happened instead. It's not incomparable.
So those disappointments, those rejections, God had a bigger plan. You just couldn't see it at the time, but looking back now, you can see that He was setting those dominoes up in a different way than what you had planned.
Exactly. Yeah. And he actually had a better idea. I'll just go ahead and admit it right now.
Hard to sometimes, right?
Yeah. And you think about this too. The one scenario would have taken me away from my then new family, little family sitting at home. And the other thing allowed me to stay with my family and send them to school and, take care of them in a way different way than what I was probably going to end up doing on my own strength and my own ideas.
Wow.
Sure.
That's amazing, Gordon. Just to think of, the God directs our lives in different directions, and we struggle with those directions at times, but He's got a perspective that's outside of our own, which is definitely bigger and better than ours. So that's an incredible story, man. It really is.
I tell it to people because I want people to, even in the face of seemingly defeat and the thing you thought was going to happen and you're so sure was going to happen, when it's no. I learned at that time when the answer is no, something I was hoping for, and the answer is no, to don't wear a watch anymore, but I learned, look at your watch or a calendar and think, how long will it be before I know why? And I'm sure at some point he will show me why. And it may be not even in this lifetime. It may be after this lifetime, but
Amen.
we will know at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And it's comforting.
Yeah. Amen to that. Well, incredible story. So how did you get from this world famous song that Eric Clapton recorded? And we all know this song. How did you get from that to hooking up with this guy called Garth Brooks?
Okay. So my brother, Brian, I remember him telling me, like, it must have been around the same time I was working with Wayne or a little bit before, that he was hiring this guy named Garth Brooks to come sing demos. So that's how Brian and Garth developed a relationship. And I remember him saying, this guy's going to be huge. And then at some point, this guy was huge. And Brian, I remember him telling me one day, and it was on a day that I was going to work with Wayne, probably on that music project that I was mentioning, the little group we were trying to do, which, by the way, was going to be called the Mute Brutes of Labor.
Okay.
So we were probably in the studio either doing that or another Kim Hill or Susan Ashton project or something. But I remember that day going in and saying, hey, Wayne, my brother Brian called me and said to tell us, wanted me to tell you that Garth said he got a speeding ticket driving through Arkansas listening to our song called White Flag.
Wow.
So we laughed and said, well, we'll put that on our resume, Well, yeah. Those 4 songs that Garth had a tape of that he was listening to driving through Arkansas, 3 of those 4 wound up being on the Chris Gaines album 7-8 years later when he did that project. Goodness. So, but before we did the Chris Gaines project with Garth fell in love with the music of Susan Ashton at some point. And it took 4 albums for her to record before I got a song on as a writer. And I had this song called You Move Me that I wrote with a great songwriter named Pierce Pettis. And Brian, again, my brother, tells me the story of Garth walking up on the band bus with Susan Ashton's CD. And the first song on that CD is You Move Me. It's her 4th album. And Brown Bannister had produced this track. Garth just walks up to the CD player on the front of the bus and pops this CD in and then sits down and it starts playing. And the guys are just kind of chit-chatting, talking and listening. And after it plays the first song, plays the second song, and it starts the 3rd song. And then some guy in the band got up and hit start over to hear You Move Me again.
Yeah.
And then at the end of You Move Me, another guy gets up and hits start over again to hear You Move Me without even going to the second song at this point. And Brian says, Garth says, that's what I thought. And he calls Susan on the phone and says, you mind if I record your song? And she said, well, of course not. You know who wrote that? And Garth said, no. And so he didn't even know. That was on the Sevens album. And then a few years later, however long, a couple years or so later, I would get a call. This is in early 99, maybe. He says, hey, I want you to come to the studio to do an overdub for me. I'm going to put you in the studio with this guy that just moved here from Australia. I think you guys will get along great. And it ended up being Keith Urban. Mm-hmm. So Keith and I get in the studio and meet each other. And we did get along great. And we had a blast playing on this song together. And after the session was over, I'm headed to my car. And of course, Garth, hey man, can I help you carry your stuff? That's Garth. Right? So, but it's fortuitous for me at the point that he's helping me cart my stuff outside, that he goes, oh man, I forgot to tell you, I need some songs for a movie that I'm going to do. And he described briefly this movie called The Lamb. And the synopsis is that, this record company has this artist that's had an arc of a career, and now it's kind of on the downside, and they plot to have the guy killed to make his catalog value go up. And it's kind of a crazy story, but he says, I need what would represent this guy's greatest hits. was like, okay. Country? He goes, no. He says, I need that. And again, Beatles, Eagles, those horrible bands we mentioned earlier. I need that kind of stuff that you do. And so that's what launched that project. And I ended up with 10 songs on co-written and written for the Garth Brooks In the Life of Chris Gaines project. And we went and did 10 or 12 TV things with him in 1999. And what an adventure. But that's how I started working with him. And then just through the years, we would kind of keep, our paths would keep intersecting again. And at some point when he was in his retirement for a little while there, in 2007, I went and did 9 nights at the Sprint Center in Kansas City, where for the first time I had to learn his country music stuff. And then 3 months later, I was in the Staples Center in LA doing 5 shows in 2 nights, 5 full 2-hour concerts in 2 nights for the firefighters of LA. So that was another brush with Garth for a little while. And then we wrote and I think it was in 2017, we wrote a song together that ended up being used for the CBS SEC football game of the week.
Oh, cool.
Which, and we did a little video for that called Pure Adrenaline. And that ran for, 12, 13 weeks or something, however many weeks. So we had to write, lyrics that would have a scenario for each game possibility. So for week 7, there might be 5 different lines that had to be tailor-made for what could be that week. So we spent a lot of time doing that together. And then a year or so after that, I get a call in the fall of 2018 asking if I would go do 3 years of stadiums with him. And so I said, let me think about that. Yeah. And so it ended up being 4 years because the pandemic, interrupted us. And so this past year, 2022, was the makeup year where I think we did about, 17 different cities or something. And it culminated with 5 sold out shows in Croke Park and Dublin, 86,000 a night or something like that. And I think I saw the other day where they said 7% of the country's population saw that concert over those. That was a great way to end the stadiums. Great way.
Gordon, I've got to ask this. You seem like a very humble guy, just from your persona and your interviews. But being up on stage like that, what's it like to play or have thousands and thousands and thousands of eyes staring at you? Being in front of all of those people in those stadiums, does it make you nervous, or you're such a professional at this point that you just bowl right ahead and do what you're supposed to do?
If it's sort of like being invisible rather than being in front of 104,000 people at Tiger Stadium in Baton Rouge. It was sort of like being invisible every night because we know who they're watching. We know all eyes are fixed on the boss, right?
Yeah.
And in fact, there was one point where he said to the band in the dressing room, because we would go in for a Saturday night stadium show. We would arrive Thursday nights, have 2 sound checks on Friday, 1 on Saturday, and then the show. So I think it was after a Friday night sound check, 1 show back in 2019, the first year we were doing them, he called the band in to the dressing room where he was and said, I need you guys to, he said, be thinking about like creating a moment where you're going to go and get right with, a group of people or a person in the audience. He said, be thinking about how you can create these moments. Because, he has the ability to take 100,000 people and make them all feel like they're the only person there.
Yeah.
And then, so I've seen him do it over and over. That's all. He does it. So I'm thinking, what can I do? What can I do to answer the bell here? And what is it he's wanting me to do? So I'm trying to think of what I can do to create a moment with the audience. Well, every time I ever tried to do that with the audience, my moment became this. I would go and write to this person or these 3 people or this group of people and get right in their face. And their response to me doing whatever it was would be, where's Garth? I mean, so that's the moment that I created was, the Gordon eclipse with Garth. It makes it where I know I could run around on stage on fire and it wouldn't matter, it just wouldn't matter. So it's that it's sort of being a little bit invisible, that it just makes you relax. Plus he's just such a great person to work for. And it's never this, there can be no mistakes, kind of guy or whatever. He's not that guy. In fact, one of those Chris Gaines gigs we were doing one time, we were heading to the stage. He said, if you make a mistake, turn up. That's how and it's full speed ahead.
Yeah.
And that's just how he is. So he sort of creates that environment. And I don't know why, but it was more adrenaline and excitement to go on stage with him than it ever was being nervous. Now, if you get me up to do a song in a wedding, that's nervous. For some reason or another, that's where I can get really nervous. There's perhaps been a few times where I've gone to do a TV thing, or I would get more nervous sitting by Peter Frampton and just the two of us doing two acoustics. We did those tours together.
Yeah.
Or we would do, the Conan O'Brien show or whatever we would do where it's one shot at it. And so those kinds of things, you have to sort of pull yourself aside and give yourself a little talk, But for some reason or other, going on stage with Garth it was just fun and an adventure. And like I said, the adrenaline, there were nights where you felt like you were about a foot above the stage because of the audience.
Yeah. Cool. Gordon, you mentioned Peter Frampton there, and you've written with Peter Frampton. And you've got to share this story. I heard this story in one of your interviews. It has to deal with some type of domino effect between Peter Frampton and David Bowie's eye. Can you tell that story, please?
Well, it occurred to me on stage during the acoustic tour, which was called Frampton Acoustic Raw. And we did 5 legs, and each leg consisted of 12, 14, 15 shows. And he particularly wanted to keep it to audience size between 800 and 1,200 seat theater. And because he wanted it to be intimate, because for the first time in his career, he was going to tell stories. So I am sitting, right to his right and listening to him tell these stories every night. And so there was one night where it just got all over me about the story that he would tell about his father, who would, he was a teacher. He taught a guy named George Underwood boxing. So he was a boxing instructor, but he taught David Bowie art. And Peter recalls, being a kid, he wasn't yet old enough to go to the school where his dad was teaching Bowie, but his dad took him to see a concert one weekend. I think it was a fundraiser maybe. And he saw David Bowie in this group. I think they were called the Conrads, if I remember correctly. But he said, of course, I was looking at the guitar player, but for some reason or other, he said, I wanted to be the guy singing and playing the saxophone. And it was this guy named David Jones, who was David Bowie. He said, so as soon as I got old enough to go to that same art school, he said, I made a beeline for David Jones. And he said, we became tight, and we would sit in the stairwell and sing songs together and play music together. And then I think they all were, fans of this music and that music, playing records, and just, got along fabulously. And but right before Peter was old enough to go to that school, he remembers sitting in the house one day and his dad coming home and his mother saying, how was your day, love? And he said, oh, it was a terrible day. He said, there was a terrible row at the school. George Underwood punched Davy Jones in the eye.
Oh, wow.
And, David had 2 different color eyes. And I remember asking Peter on stage one night, so wait a minute, said, and George, by the way, would end up doing album cover work for David Bowie. So they stayed friends, such as guys, right? They punch each other in the face and then they work on projects together. But he said, I said to him on stage, I said, so arguably, because you taught George Underwood boxing and David Bowie, art, he said, the two different color eyes, he said, you're kind of responsible for the two different color eyes, the one off color eye and the eye for art for one David Bowie, and he got a big kick out of that. It was kind of funny, but he also would credit David Bowie as being the guy that would sort of pull him out of the nosedive he had found himself in career-wise, because that live album was so enormous that he had trouble following it himself, and let some managers make, decisions or whatever that just, I don't know, kind of had him trying to recover from his own success. And when David Bowie saw this happening to Peter, called him and invited him to come play on a new album, which Peter was excited to do. And then would you come and be on the Glass Spider tour with me as the electric guitar player, which Peter was excited to do. And he said at that point, he reintroduced me to the world as the guitar player, which is, as he said, that's all I've ever wanted to be. And I thought it was fitting also that one of the albums we did together called Fingerprints was what he finally won a Grammy for. And it's an instrumental album. So he's the guitar player. That's all he's ever wanted to be. And he's a scary, great guitar player. I think people don't understand, because a lot of times you mention that name, they think the talk box and the gimmick and the wah, 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 but the guy is unbelievably great and a lovely person too. I've been fortunate to know him now for going on 23. I guess we've known each other for 23 years now and been working together all this time. It's a blessing.
Tremendous story. And I've always wondered what happened to Bowie's eye that made it look like that. But after hearing your interview, that makes sense now. And it's amazing.
Yeah, I don't know if that's confirmed somewhere, but could be.
That's crazy. That's absolutely insane. And those dominoes falling into place again. And that's a cool story. Gordon, I want to ask you, you're such an accomplished songwriter. And I've asked this same question. People are probably listening to this interview or watching it and say, why do you keep asking the same question? It's because I'm curious. And the question I want to ask is, what makes a great song? And I happened to, before the interview, I put off the shelf behind me a Jerry Rafferty album here. And one of the songs is Baker Street. Mm-hmm. And I'm always curious. I'm not a musician, but I love music. I'm always curious. I'd love to see processes and how things come together with individuals to make something greater than themselves. And I want to ask you this question, and it's maybe it can't be answered. I'm not sure. But what makes a song like Baker Street a great song? What makes a song like Change the World a great song? Is it the composition? Is it the melodies? Is it the singer-songwriter? How does that come together? Because, I've got a past of graphic design in my past, and I still use it occasionally. And I've had people ask me, what makes a graphic design great? And I can give them some fundamentals like, shape, color, texture, type, and so forth. But I always answer, it's basically, you know it when you see it.
That's right.
And is songwriting the same way for a great song? You know it when you hear it, or there are certain building blocks that have to come together to make a song great?
Yeah, I would say a lot of what you said, definitely yes. Is there a formula? No, I don't think there's a formula. To me, to put it in the simplest terms, I've always thought of it as a two-part equation. The first part is having something to say, and play would be part of that. Having something to say and play, and all of us have something to say. The second part is where it gets a little cloudier, and it's learning how to say it in a way that somebody else wants to hear it. And then the difference at that point between being a song and a hit song is, and perhaps learning how to say it in a way somebody else wants to hear it, over and over and over and over and over again. So the way to get to that is I don't know. If you knew, you would just repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat. So, I would say I've got songs that I think are better than Change the World, but that would blow up the whole, if it's that formula and that song is fits right in that template, then you would just do it again. But that's not how it works. And so it's a little nebulous as far as trying to say what the ingredients are. I say I'm a fan of songs that have great melodies, but there are hit songs that have no melodies right now. And I mean, I can hear some country songs, in fact, right now where the melody seems to be the same note for a while. And so at that point, is it the melody? It can't be. It's what they're saying. Even the vowel sounds seem to be very significant in a lot of country music right now, because you can hear it often in the background, and I don't know what they're singing, but I know it's country because of the twang, Mm-hmm. So it's the way it's being done, the style that might be the reason why people enjoy hearing it. So, I mean, it's all over the place. So I really don't think that there's, a formula that I can point to, or make sure you do a pinch of this and a whatever of that to make sure that it works. But you said it when you said it's like for art, graphic art, I mean, I went to the Van Gogh Museum. I've often thought about the parallel between songwriting and, painting like that.
Oh yeah.
When I went to his museum, and the thing that makes me focus on him more is because knowing his story and the 800 plus whatever it was paintings that he did, where in his lifetime he only saw the sale of one out of all of those. One. But when I went to the museum in Amsterdam, it's all in chronological order, and the first works that are put up, you're looking at it and you're going, that's Van Gogh. I don't recognize that as Van Gogh, and that looks like dogs playing poker. There's a letter from his brother encouraging him to keep going or whatever, and that's Van Gogh. But then all of a sudden there's this, your knees buckle. And then from there, for the rest of the journey through the museum, it's just one after another, after another, after another. And if Starry Night is the biggest painting that he ever had, and he wanted to repeat that, and think about this in terms of the songwriter as well, would he just paint Starry Night again? No, he painted something else. Mm-hmm. Sunflowers, wheat, the different things that he painted, were all coming from the same soul. Yeah. What he had to, coming out of him, that he wanted to get out of him and onto the canvas. So I think sometimes maybe there's an authenticity that's required for people to identify with it, and to me, it's like wood that resonates. There's some wood that resonates really well, some that doesn't, so the same thing is happening when people are hearing the sounds in a song. And does that resonate? The instruments that are in there, does that resonate? And then, of course, the lyrics, a whole different category. Does that story, what's being said, does that resonate with the listener? So, like you said, you know it when you see it, but you also know it when you hear it. There are too many factors to try to say, oh, this is what it is. But yeah, you're right when you say you know it when you see it. You know it when you hear it also.
I think part of it for me is songs that take me on a journey. And mm-hmm. I remember clear as day, and it's not everyone's cup of tea, but you mentioned growing up listening to a Rush album. Mm-hmm. I remember I was 12 or 13 years old, maybe a year or so after the Moving Pictures album had come out by Rush. And mm-hmm. I remember hearing that at a friend's house. And I was like, I'd never heard anything like that before in my life, because this album took me on a journey in my mind. And great instruments, great playing by the musicians, great orchestration and all that. But it took me on a journey. And it's like nothing I'd ever heard in my life before that.
Yeah.
And to me, I think it's all of those things with the musicianships, the lyrics, but also in my mind, it takes me somewhere else, kind of in a fantasy journey or something like that. So that's just my 2 cents in the matter, because I'm not a musician, but just as a fan, that's where I kind of fall on it.
Yeah, if you think about it, the movie maker can have 90 minutes, 120 minutes, 200 minutes, or whatever to tell a story. The author of a book can have 400 or 500 pages to tell a story, but the songwriter really gets 3 or 4 minutes to tell the story. So you have to consider that there's this shorter time to get it done, but yeah, there are some pieces of music that can do that. It's interesting that you talk about being taken on a journey by the way of the story. My father worked with Tom T. Hall, and whose nickname was the Storyteller.
Oh, wow.
And so when you listen to his songs, he is telling a specific story and doing it in 3 minutes. Yeah. So that's a craft and a gift to be able to do that. Martin Knopfler is somebody else that is phenomenal at that. I just think that when I listen to each one of those songs that he does, I've watched a great movie. He's able to do it in a few minutes. But he will read a book about Ray Kroc that, founded McDonald's fast food, and he will record a song called Boom Like That. And it's, like I said, 3.5 minutes or whatever. And, I just read the book,
Gosh.
It's the ultimate Cliff's Notes, because you get to listen to him play and sing at the same time. So, but yeah, that journey you're talking about. And sometimes I feel that even listening to instrumentals, that I'm going on an adventure.
Well, speaking of great songs and great musicianship, and you touched on it earlier about your band, Dogs of Peace. I want to talk about that for just a minute. You guys had 2 albums about 10 years apart. Is that correct? You talked about the first one, I think it was 1996, and then the next one, maybe, was it 20 years apart? I'm sorry. Talk about Dogs of Peace a little bit.
Well, again, that was one that we were Jimmy Lee and I were answering the bell for our dear friend Peter York at Sparrow Records, because there was a void for any kind of music like that on the label at that particular time, because PFR had stepped aside from making any new records. And so we just went in to fill that gap. And then, like I said, once we started it, it became the thing that we were very passionate about doing it well. And Jeff Balding jumped into the picture. And so really the 5 people that made the record were Jimmy Lee Sloas, John Hammond, Blair Masters, and Jeff Balding engineering. So 20 years go by, and I remember being at an event where Jeff Emmerich, the Beatles, the guy that engineered so many of their records, was getting ready to do a little speech we had him come do for Naris. And I just casually leaned over to Jeff and said, "So when are we doing the next Dogs record?" He goes, "Let's do it." Yeah. So it wasn't by, popular demand and all that kind of stuff. It was just simply these 5 guys wanting to do this again and looking at each other and agreeing that if the only reason we are doing this is to simply use our gifts, make this music, and then walk it up and place it at the altar, and then say, "We hope you find this pleasing," and then leave it at that. So that's really why we did the second one. We're actually talking about doing a third one right now. And just because, again, these guys have all been so blessed to have been at music for as long as we've all been at it, that, I've written songs where I've done it just to give my dad, instead of going and buying a Hallmark card. There are times when you just want to express it that way. Yeah. So we just want to use this that we know how to do and express it to God in the way that He has given us the ability to do. So, giving back to the one who gave it to us in the first place. And if that's the only reason we do it, that's good enough for us. So we're talking about doing another one right now.
Now, Gordon, didn't you guys have a single out last year? A new single?
Yeah, we just, and again, that was, it was called 2020 Vision. And it was just, speaking about that particular year and what we saw happening to ourselves and our people, everybody around us, what was going on. So we did the one track and just made that available. So, and again, we do all these things with zero label, zero marketing, zero budget, and nothing. It's just, it'd be like us saying, hey, you want to go fishing?
Yeah.
And that's what we do.
Well, those albums are on my order list. I can tell you that right now after listening to them. I want to have something physical with that. Cool. But yeah, I'll put the links below the video to all of Gordon's links to his website. If you want to order his merchandise, his albums, everything is below the video. So please check it out. And as far as Dogs of Peace, that you guys are amazing. Some heavy hitting songs on there, and I love the album art as well. The art on the album covers, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, the first one actually came out of some book that was several decades old or something that Sparrow found that image somewhere. And then the second album, Heal, was a friend of mine, and now he's a friend. But this is so crazy. I was at John Hammond's house one time. We were recording for the record. And I said something about, I have an idea in my head that I think would make the good album cover, because the first album was called Speak. And the album is very conversational. If you listen to the songs, most of the songs on that record are the conversation between whoever's the perspective of the singer on the song and God, and then God's response, Speak. And then so the second album is we're going to call Heal. And I said, I have in my head what it needs to be. And John said, I know this friend that I play golf with named Nate Mather. And he said, let me call him. And he puts me on the phone with Nate right there in his kitchen. And nice to meet you, Nate. I've got this thing in my head that I think would be a good album cover for this new album we're going to do called Heal. I said, I want it to say H-E-E-L, which would be a command you would give a dog, like Speak was on the first record. Now Heal, to fall in line behind who you're following, or come rest here at my feet, I said, but I want it to be a foot stepping on the head of the serpent, but not the Garden of Gethsemane image so much like a sandal or, whatever. I said, maybe a Chuck Taylor Converse shoe, Yeah. And then I said, and then where it says Heal, I said, I want it to be when you turn the album upside down, there's a reflection. So I don't know if it's over water I don't know how we pull this off, but when you turn the album upside down, the reflection says Heal, H-E-A-L. Because that's what took place in the Garden of Gethsemane when the head of the serpent was crushed. So that Heal. So the next day, Nate sends me his first draft. And I could not believe it, because what he put to the canvas was exactly what I had seen in my head, even to the style of what he did. Except that he made the shoe red instead of black. That was the only difference. I said, I cannot believe that you did this. So then we, subsequently had him go and do a little piece of art for every song on the record, which is, you can see in the CD, there's a little booklet. And, so we got to know and love Nate, and now I'm close friends with him. And that's just another one of those domino things and the Mosaic, that's, why his tile was within reach of mine, because it would end up being this other thing that would work together because of meeting. And so he's a good one.
Well, those are amazing albums. I encourage anyone to give a listen, download, or if you can buy the physical as well, do that as well. But two great albums. And I'm sitting with expectation if you guys do another album. So I'll definitely order that as well.
We're doing another one. So,
well, that's amazing.
Might take another year or so, but who knows how long it takes. We just do it as we have time, and then it'll happen at some point.
Gordon, what's on your? Can you speak about maybe some projects that you're working on that you can talk about, or what's on your agenda?
Well, we're going to do another Dogs of Peace project as we have the time and get a chance to chip away at doing something like that. It might take a while to do it, but we're going to do it. I'm working with Wes King tomorrow. He's got some songs that he wants to record, and he and I have written a song that we're going to start working on with drummer Steve Brewster tomorrow. I do plenty of songwriter singing, performance kind of gigs around town, mostly for charity. I'm able to get back to that now that the stadiums tour is over, but I am going back to work for Garth in May. And it's going to be 3 total trips to Vegas and back. He's doing one of those residency things where everybody comes to the same venue for the next 2 years. So I'm committed to doing that with him. And, I actually play in a band around town that does all Tom Petty music that we have a lot of fun. That's a blast. And, people say, what do you do? I go, whatever they let me do. So, whenever Peter calls or Ricky calls or Garth calls, I'm very fortunate that those are the people in my life who call me for things. And so those people keep me busy. But yeah, I don't do tons of writing these days, but if it's somebody like Bonnie, Raitt, or the names I just rattled off, people like that, of course, I want to do that. I'll write a song for Bonnie just to hear her sing it.
She just won a Grammy, right?
3. She just won 2 Grammys. And the thing that made me laugh was she got up and won Song of the Year, and all of the new artists that were at the Grammys were wondering, where did this new blues singer come from? They didn't know who she was. So it was like it blew up in the media that all these new artists are out there scratching their heads going, where did this person come from? And they didn't know who Bonnie Raitt was, which was kind of funny. We were laughing about that, but she's so great. She's so just and a wonderful human being too. Ever since I got to work with her right after the Grammys in '97, she called asking if we would write a song for her. So I've had 5 songs recorded by her now, and she's just a dear, sweet person. Always very generous to us to invite us to the shows and that kind of thing. It's just wonderful.